Hello. I've been given the guidance to go ahead and get this session started in the interest of time, so that's what I'll do. So my name is Anshuman Pandey. I am the current technical director of the Script Encoding Initiative, and I'm here to talk about guidelines for handling unstandardized and undeciphered scripts in Unicode. So just a little bit about me. Excuse me. I work for a fintech company in called Avant in Chicago, where I'm an analytics engineering manager. And I came to that role through a long, circuitous path. I was, prior to that, a postdoc in linguistics at Berkeley, working with Debbie Anderson of SCI. And prior to that, I earned my PhD in history from the University of Michigan. And throughout that entire time, I've been working on Unicode. And in 2011, I was, I think, prematurely given the Unicode Bulldog Award. And I think because there was nobody else in the field who had not received it at that time. So it was a pity award to me at that time. But since then, I've been working on several scripts, and I'll show you. And as I mentioned, I'm currently the technical director of the SEI and also a mentor of the Silicon Unicode internship program at Stanford University. So to date, I've encoded 30 scripts in Unicode, and 2 of these are in Unicode 17, and they're 2 of the 4 new scripts that were added to the standard in that version. And in addition to the scripts, I've encoded several number forms, various character additions, and 4 emoji. And currently working on various other ancient and very ancient scripts, two of which, one's fairly modern and one's fairly ancient. These were recently recommended by the Script Encoding Working Group for inclusion in the future version of the Unicode standard. So SEI is doing a lot of good work in keeping the pipeline flowing in terms of scripts that we're adding to Unicode. So why do I do all this? It's a labor of love that's oriented towards ensuring that the display input interchange of text in every attested script around the globe is as digitally native as the English text in Latin script that you're reading now. So today, I'll be talking about Proto-Sinaitic. And I realize that in the presentation abstract, I had mentioned another script called Byblos. But the one thing I've been doing in my life is simplifying. And I figured for the purposes of this presentation as well, I would simplify for your benefit as well, and for mine, and focus on a single script, and that is this Proto-Sinaitic script here. So recently, I've moved away from the modern scripts and have been working on encoding a lot of the early writing. So here's a not quite accurate genealogy of some of the early scripts that we have, and Proto-Sinaitic is missing from this list, but I think it's synonymous here with what's being labeled as Proto-Canaanite. But I've placed Proto-Sinaitic a little higher between Proto-Canaanite and hieroglyphs because it is the intermediary and the ancestor there of everything that comes after Proto-Canaanite, such as Phoenician onto Greek and Latin. So Proto-Sinaitic is termed that because it is primarily attested in initially region B, which is in the Sinai. And then an older form of the script is actually found in region A, which is Middle Egypt, called Wadi el-Hol. But because the script was first found in the Sinai, scholars at that time had given it the name Proto-Sinaitic. Not only was it developed in the Sinai, but at a particular location in the Sinai called Srabet el-Kadim. That's the modern name. At that location in the Sinai, there was a massive temple complex to the goddess Hathor, who was the Egyptian goddess associated with turquoise. And this area around Srabet el-Kadim was very well known for its turquoise mines and other luxurious jewels that were found there. And so that's where the script was invented. So here we have hieroglyph votive inscriptions to the Egyptian goddess Hathor. This was a very extensive temple at some point in the past. It has obviously decayed since then. But in addition to all these hieroglyphs, they found objects there that had a strange script inscribed upon various objects. And the script is very unlike hieroglyphics, but it had some resemblance to hieroglyphics. And we'll talk about that in a second. But here we go and say, here are some examples of what we call Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions. We have horizontal forms of the script. We have some vertical forms of text, some mixed and some boustrophodon text as well. So boustrophodon, for those who don't know, is text that's written in a direction from left to right or right to left, and then it continues down the medium in an S shape. And the name derives from as the cow plows or as the cow walks. And also because this script, due to its original nature, the writers would just start wherever they could, and then they would just cut off and point the text in a direction when they reach the end of a tablet or the end of excuse me, a rock or something like that. Even though that script is from about 1900 BCE, it's still currently used. Scholars around the world who study the early alphabet reference the glyphs and the script itself in various scholarly publications, but also it's moved into the public domain as well and into popular culture. Here we have in this yellow, college-ruled image, a page from a children's book about the first alphabet, showing the correspondences between our letters A through Z and the original Proto-Sinaitic forms here. And then also an individual named Peter Wilson, a couple of decades ago, developed a meta font for what he calls Proto-Semitic, but this is essentially the Proto-Sinaitic. So far from being a scholarly novelty, this script is quite popular, and also I haven't shown any examples here, but it's quite popular among people interested in biblical archaeology and in Judaic studies, and in terms of identifying the Ur script, or the Ur script, if you will, of Hebrew and related writing systems. But as I mentioned, the majority of the sources in the script were found in the Sinai. And there are 2 inscriptions that are in mainland Egypt, and 3 to 8, the consensus is not quite sure yet, but 3 to 8 that were found in Canaan. Now the finds that are located in Canaan are referred to as Proto-Canaanite, which is an evolution of Proto-Sinaitic, but which come from a much later date. But they're all kind of grouped together by scholars. Sign inventories, there's a lot of text given the time period, and we've identified at least 27 distinctive signs across a collection of 533 total signs that are distributed across the known corpus. And these are the distinctive signs for Proto-Sinaitic. Fairly elementary, fairly iconic, fairly graphical in their both creation and in their stance, and also in their depiction. Now, let's take a little break into an exercise. So if you were to see these images of these texts, these hieroglyphs out in the wild somewhere, and you had no idea how to read hieroglyphs, had no idea about how to interpret Egyptian orthography, or even knew what any of these signs meant in Egyptian, how would you characterize the first sign? Can I? Cow, bull, ox. Okay, that's good. What about the second one?
Snake, water. Grass.
Snake, water, grass. And what about the last one? Head. Yes. So that's kind of how the script came about. So the hypothesis is that In the turquoise mines at Serabat el-Khadim, you had a group of non-Egyptian, what the Egyptians called foreign, miners. These were Semitic-speaking individuals from Canaan, would come down to work as miners, and they had no way to read hieroglyphs. However, as I showed previously, they were in an area that was inundated with reliefs carrying inscriptions, votive inscriptions for Hathor. The idea is that they identified certain signs that occurred with a lot of with great frequency, and at some point decided to use that sign to write their own language. So the idea is called the alphabet hypothesis, that they chose an iconic common hieroglyph, like a cow's head or an ox or a bull, and they gave it a Semitic name. And based on the Semitic name, they took the first letter of that name, the sound of that name, and that was a value given to the sign. So when they saw an ox head, which they called Ulpu, they called that letter or a glottal stop. And at that point, it had lost its initial relation, and if it ever had any, to the original hieroglyph. So at this point, you have a transference of semantic value from an object representing some semantic token in Egyptian to just an image that now represents a Semitic sound. And over time, this Ulpu, this ox head, transformed and evolved into what we have eventually as, oh, sorry, this last thing should be Latin, as represented in an inscription from 114 in the Common Era. But this is kind of how scholars believe that our modern alphabet descended from Proto-Sinaitic and also by extension from Egyptian hieroglyphs. Now, this seems pretty straightforward. You have 27 distinct characters in the script, 24 of which are considered to be the core set of characters. There are some characters that were used for Semitic sounds that were not commonly used throughout the corpus. They're relegated to a few inscriptions within Sinai itself, not very commonly used. But this small script of 27 characters presents a lot of challenges for encoding. Now, for a long time, scholars were not sure that Proto-Sinaitic was actually a script. They didn't really know what to call it. They gave it a name, Proto-Sinaitic, but what's it really proto of? Typology, what's its structure? They weren't sure if it was iconic or somehow logographic, or whether it was alphabetic. We'll talk about that in a second as well. Or what the default directionality was. They showed the texts were written horizontally, vertically, then horizontally, and then also boustrophedon. And more importantly, is there a standard or consensus repertoire? I had mentioned 27 distinct characters, but there is still ongoing debate about which of those actually count as Proto-Sinaitic and which are perhaps Proto-Canaanite or something else. And I mean, this is kind of a self-answering question. Is there a community of users? Well, there are scholars, but the ancient Semitic speakers at that time no longer exist. So we can't really have them speak for themselves or about the script itself. And more importantly, for encoding in Unicode, is there any requirement for representing the script in plain text? So let's kind of go through the workflow here. So status, yeah, verdict, I would call it a functional script. Here we have excerpts from the Sphinx, the two Sphinx records that I showed earlier. They're in two different objects, and they are written at different times. But one thing that we see is that there's some apparent rules of orthography, and also some spelling conventions as well. So there's an idea that when you put certain words together, it represents a particular name, and this is how we write the name. and the name is important to us. So we're going to say, if you're going to write this name, use these characters. So here we have basically an excerpt from the Sphinx that says L, B, Aleph, L, T, or Lamed Beit, Aleph, Lamed Tav. And this is, it's proposed that this reading is to the lady. And the lady itself is Hathor here. And this is the translation that was given in 1916 by Gardner. Now, is it a distinctive script? The answer is yes. Here we have a Sphinx that has both Proto-Sinaitic on the bottom, written there on the base, and right above it on the shoulder, you have actual true hieroglyph. So here we have an object, which I think is quite significant in its existence, that shows somebody who knows how to write hieroglyphs, and somebody who either at that time simultaneously, either being the same person, the same scribe, or maybe a different individual came across it later, who wrote something in a different script altogether, recognizing that what I'm writing is different from what came before, or that I'm going to write two different texts in two different scripts simultaneously. But the fact that we have Proto-Sinaitic being distinctively written in opposition to hieroglyphs indicates that there was an awareness at that time, even in 1900 BC, that this was a brand new script unrelated to hieroglyphs, even though it descends graphically from that source. We also see that there's stability of sign archetypes. These characters, even though there's some variation in the glyphs, they represent the overall shape or the idea of the sound. And we can talk about that in a second as well. Now, directionality, this is the problematic area in terms of the encoding, because what you have essentially is a group of miners who had no script before, who encountered hieroglyphs, decided to take certain symbols from that superset to make it, quote unquote, their own, and then they would just write with it. So an example of variability, but also potential semantic value in terms of orientation, is this top to bottom, left to right text, where the scribe begins up here on the left edge and begins to write downwards. Now you see this first character, which is our beloved ox head, it's facing left. And then the snake is facing left, and then we have the cross, the tav, and then you have the sheen or the chest, the breast. Then you have this corner, which is a P, and then you have another snake, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, in the vertical stance, you have characters that are facing left. And then when the scribe hits the bottom, because they're probably not used to like adjusting their text beforehand, like say, oh, I have this much space to write. Let me move this up a little bit up the steel, or let me move this around. They get to the bottom and they get to the snake and said, oh, I got to write the sheen, another sheen after this, but I'm out of space. So now I'm going to go to the right. And as I go to the right, if there is a sign that has a quote unquote face, that face begins to orient itself in the direction of writing. So the aleph that we have, alpu that we have at the very top, we see here in the bottom, is now facing the direction of writing. It's facing to the right. So is the head, that rosh, another aleph, then a rosh. So you see that there's some understanding of what's happening with our letters. How are we interacting with the space that we're given? And in my opinion, the writer is exhibiting some sort of semantic understanding of both ductus, direction, and what these letters actually mean to the individual. So this is a big question. Which of these is actually the normative or standard way of looking at the orientation or stance of Proto-Sinaitic? The repertoire here, I had mentioned that there are at least 27 distinctive forms, but we see that across the corpus, we have several variants for a given sign. Like here, if we look at the fifth row where we have ho or halal, a man calling or jubilating, is basically the shape of an individual with arms raised. Now, the precision with which that sign is drawn may be unimportant. What's important is that it carries the basic shape or the archetype of a man with two arms. But as we'll see in another example, there could be some semantic variation and explicit purposefulness behind the usage of certain signs in certain contexts. Now, it's the same thing with the bait, where we see the different shapes of the house and also the orientation, let's say, of the wall. Like, are they using a particular stance for the hook with the loop at it in a given context, or is it just free variation taking place? Again, I had mentioned glyphic stability. Which of these forms is the correct form? Same thing with MIME. Here we have a situation where these are both Wadi al-Hol inscriptions, where the MIME is horizontal when it's written from top to bottom, and then when it's written from right to left, it takes a vertical stance. And then I mentioned the name. So Proto-Sinaitic, this is the current conventional scholarly name for the script, but what is it actually proto to? There's the possibility of Sinaitic itself, which establishes the script independently of an ancestor. And then some scholars use the generic name early alphabetic. So the Unicode status for the script, for the longest time, it had been on not the roadmap. It was considered a pseudo script, or not insufficient evidence had been provided to the UTC at that time for them to make a determination about its suitability for encoding and where to place it in the roadmap. In 2019, I submitted a fairly detailed document suggesting that the script needs to be reviewed in terms of its suitability for encoding. And in October of that year, it was added back to the SMP roadmap. But guidelines for encoding Proto-Sinaitic, this was supposed to be a much larger, but as I mentioned, keeping things simple. The main questions here, allocation of the script. Do we want to encode this as an independent block, or is there insufficient evidence for its potential usage as an independent script? And would it suffice to be encoded as a variation of, let's say, Phoenician? And we would have differences between the two scripts controlled via selection of fonts. If we are encoding it as an independent block, we want a core repertoire, or we want an extended one. So the core will be a superset of all distinctive signs, which would have the 27. And then we would pick the form which has the greatest distribution across the corpus. There's the potential of having an extended repertoire that has variations in terms of the stances, the left and right, top, bottom facing, which would give users the ability to not have to just normalize text that could have inherent semantic properties, such as left-facing cow's head versus a right-facing cow's head. If you don't have an extended repertoire, then you have one stance, probably the right-facing one, and you use that for all instances of that character. But that's where we are with that. I'd like to actually have a discussion about the suitability of encoding such a script and to hear your ideas about it. But in the interest of time, I just want to say thank you to SEI and also to the Unicode Consortium for the material support, but I think more importantly, for the people I've worked with in both organizations who have really helped me think about how to encode not only Proto-Sinaitic, but also all the other scripts, and in particular, these individuals here. So thank you for that. Very happy and very excited to have a discussion about encoding such scripts and how we would go about even wanting to put together a proposal. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Hi, Anshu. Thank you for that. I was wondering about what the process looked like for convincing the script encoding working group to move it off not the roadmap and onto the roadmap. Like, what did the process look like for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what fundamentally came down to was that there was a document that had come before, which was essentially just a code chart. But Michael Everson had put together years prior further work on that document or even on the repertoire. And I think maybe you know the history better about how scripts got into the roadmap at a given time. But maybe there were certain guidelines that they had in place at that time to say the script must meet n number of attributes in order to be included on the roadmap. And maybe because there was no other supplemental text besides the code chart, no examples of usage or no specimens. So maybe it was just deemed to be sufficiently incomplete for action. And so maybe when we submitted the document to resuscitate its Unicode status, we had provided lengthy justification about utility of the script that's actually a script. A lot of evidence showing its usage, both by its native users 3,000 years ago, but also current scholars. And there are two scholars who have done extensive work on this, Christopher Ralston at George Washington University, and Orly Goldwasser, who is in Israel. I'm not sure at which, maybe Ben Gurion University. I'm not sure. But they write extensively about this script, and they use the original hieroglyph forms as well as all the variants in their articles. Especially Dr. Goldwasser does a lot of illustration using all the different variants. And what I'm thinking is that it's that sort of evidence that was able to give the UTC enough information to make a decision to add it back as a legitimate script that could be encoded. Let me ask, I'm sorry, Kira, do you want to? Yes, please.
Do you have a favorite character in the Proto-Sinaitic script?
I probably do. Yeah, and that is, it's actually, it's A. It's man jubilating. And I think this is important because this root, HLL, it's the root of the term hallelujah.
Oh.
Yeah. Halal, or ho, to call. So these have various different meanings in Egyptian hieroglyphs. Like this last one, I think represents, it's indicator for human male. But there's a sense from the scholars that the Canaanite speakers interpreted it as a man jubilating or man dancing. So in this Wadi al-Hol inscription too, you see that form there of that dancing man here, which is very different than the form of the dancing man or the hay man in inscription 1. And so there's this individual named Brian Coley's a translation of inscription 1, in which is calling about dancing and partying and jubilating the goddess Anat. And he comes to that reading by doing a mix of logographic and acrophonic interpretation of the characters, where he directly interprets the man with the bended knee as jubilation, as dancing, as opposed to the man who is not dancing or just standing still as just being a hay character. So this is like jubilating versus the sound ha. So that's my favorite character because it's polysemic, and in my opinion, that's kind of the beauty of early scripts, is that you could write whatever you would interpret, because you know that your fellow language speaker will probably pick up on what you meant, because they were all taught this script. And the other thing is that you have the graphical variability, and even though there's a lot of difference as I mentioned, like in the ox head, if anyone saw that, despite what direction it was facing, whether there was an eye there or whether there were like a mouth or an ear, everyone knew that this was alpu, that this was the sound It's like if you were to write lowercase a, everyone writes A's in different ways, but when we see it on the board, we all know that it's an A, right? So that's the kind of same idea that these signs became highly iconic to the point where any variation would never disrupt the actual semantic value of the sign. So to answer your question, my favorite is A. I really also like meme, which is the water, just because it's so elementary, right? Like I showed my son this and he said, Dada, that's water. He's 4.5 years old. And I went through this, I said, what do you think this is? He's like, this is ox. Like, this is the head, this is water, this is snake, this is head. He's a 4.5-year-old kid. And then, I chose this as kind of the watermark because this is how my son writes too. I was telling Andrew Glass during lunch that like my son, he's writing very well, but he'll get to the end of like the whiteboard and he'll go on the next line and start writing things right to left, but he'll change the stance of the letters. So like let's say he's writing his name Veer, V-E-R, he'll get to that point, then he'll write the E's facing this way. The R facing this way. Then when he gets down here, he'll write it this way. My wife's like, is he dyslexic? I'm like, no, he's a genius. Works with relation to the boundaries of this board that he's writing. And also, like, yeah, now I'm writing this way now, so things are going to go this way. They're flowing in the direction of writing. And so I think there's something very, very elemental, very like primal about this script that, to answer your question, like all these characters, the directionality and that way in which they've used it really appealed to me. And like the most amazing thing is that our alphabet comes from this, our A through Z. From some miners who were just trying to invent something to say Egyptians can have that. Why can't we have our own set of letters? Do you have something where you're stretching? No? So my question is to the Unicode enthusiasts: how would you go about handling something like Proto-Sinaitic? If you know about the character glyph model, where take that Latin letter A, we have so many different forms of it. Minuscule, we have the unseals, we have italic versus bold versus upright. How would you handle the different forms of the octet, the alpu, for example, if you were to encode this script? Anybody, please, let's start over here.
Well, talking about A, and you got your your 2-story and your 1-story A, for using a basic example, a lot of the time that's handled on the font level. Whether you're using font features, whether you're like OpenType as ports, or whether you're just selecting a font that looks a certain way. Technically, italic is a different font from the regular font. It's just all packaged together. I don't know if with this many variants, if you'd want to handle it if you'd want to encode them all, but if we're doing a direct comparison to how Latin handles different visual versions of different graphemes, that would be the parallel.
I think a robust and also computationally efficient way of perhaps mapping all of the different variants, especially when we're talking about cross-lingual transfer, right? We're talking about representing them as a relative embedding to or relative representation of a Latin character. So I think one way to do it is to register by stroke thickness or by as you can see, it's either different various strokes or various depths. So if you characterize them by depths and then embedded each representation across the entire corpora against a Latin script, then you could essentially maintain, again, this computational efficiency where the different embeddings are separated by how they're visually represented. So like maybe employing a CNN LSTM framework, or making it so that someone can in fact can manifest a character based on a Latin-based input if they're using a standard keyboard.
When I'm thinking about this question, I think I just have even more questions. So kind of to give you context, so I'm a second generation Taiwanese American, so my parents are from Taiwan, and Taiwanese Hokkien does not really have any like phonetic way to represent it. They do use Chinese characters, but people just understand it just because they read it, and so people don't actually know how many tones there are in Taiwanese. There's not a standardized way to look at it, but I would be probably annoyed if every time I try to write oxhead and I know there's like 7 different ways of like what there's like encoded differences in there. Like I think that when I see like, for example, the letter A, it's like the lowercase one has a little line, but nobody actually writes like that with handwriting. That'd be like kind of crazy actually. But people, I mean, they're people, but okay, so that's a choice. So I'm just saying, like, a lot of people usually write A's with a circle and a line, right? But you don't actually see that type of A on computers, but we still recognize different variants. So I think there are some variants that, like, as people are encoding, they're also making choices of how other people in the future, when they look at that language, how that happens, because we're like, there's no really way to be like, okay, this is a specimen, like this is like their language, and then you want to encode it. Like there's going to be some like changes that happen as we are touching the code, as we are encoding it. So I don't really know what's the right answer for that. I really think it really depends. Like at least for the Taiwanese people, there was a linguist in the 80s, to give you context. He thought that because of the way that the phonemes worked in Taiwanese Hokkien, they were going to use Korean Hangul to write out all the Taiwanese. But Taiwanese has tones. And also, if you're using Korean script, what does that say about Korea and China and the whole geopolitical history of that? But as someone who knows both Korean and Mandarin Chinese, I do think that personally, I mean, that's how I learned a little bit of Taiwanese, is I literally wrote out in Hangul script and then made my own diacritics on top of it to indicate tones. But like, that's just me learning it. Like, I don't know what's like, so that's a conversation that, and if anyone in Unicode wants to talk about Taiwanese Hokkien, I would love to talk with you, because I don't know I don't know what's like the way to go about it, because the island themselves can't even agree on it, you know? So not sure how that would even work, but if they don't become digital, then they're in risk of dying out as well, right? So I don't know. To me, there are more questions than there are answers, but those are different possibilities of like, I don't know if people are thinking about them. If they're thinking about them, I would love to talk with you.
Yeah, I think the point you raised about the iconicity of different forms of A being very like visual or mental like variants of what we consider to be some sort of like archetypical A that has a defined shape. That even though we all write, let's say, lowercase a, when we see that more elaborate curved A with the belly, we all recognize what it is, even though we may not write that way. So I think there's something to be said there about the way humans process, like especially like alphabetic consonantal alphabets that could be distinct from other sorts of writing systems. But that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think the catch-22 here is Unicode wants to encode scripts, not orthographies, because we look at scripts as their own thing with their own internal grammar even, and like complexity and stuff like that. Whereas an orthography is how you use the script to write a language. And in an orthography, some things might be the same that are still not the same in the script, and trying to tell that apart is really hard. I've had this moment with Chinese a whole bunch, with Cantonese specifically, where learning to read and write, there's a bunch of characters that to an uninitiated person, they're like, those are almost the same thing. And you spend some time and then you realize, no, these are completely different. And then at some point I got to a thing where I was learning, like, I think this was when I started learning Cantonese, the word for of is ge. It's written, it's a complicated looking character. And there's like some minor different ways in which to write it. And I was like, these are obviously different. Is this something else? And the teacher couldn't understand what I was talking about, because to me, they were obviously different. But to her, as a user of this writing system, they were obviously the same. It was like the single story and double story A. So like there's things that are the same, even though they look more different than some of the things that are different. And this is a matter of orthography. This is a matter of kind of user perception. There's also the Cantonese word for give is written in three different characters. They are different. If you can substitute one for the other when writing Cantonese, but no one is going to say, oh, those are the same character. They will look at them like you've done a completely different character there. So, oh yeah, but like there's a lot of that interplay between script and orthography that you have to worry about.
So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all. Appreciate your